everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling something that could really save you some major headaches down the line.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Especially if you're, the type who likes to launch new projects or make big changes at your company.
Yes.
We're talking about initial fraud impact assessments, or
IFIAs?
IFIAs. Yeah, so...
I like to think of an IFIA as kind of like a fraud checkup.
Okay.
Just like you get a checkup, before you start a new fitness routine so you don't hurt yourself.
Yeah.
An IFIA can help you spot and address potential fraud risks before they become big problems.
So kind of like preventative medicine, but for your business.
Exactly.
I like that analogy. But, why should our listeners care about this?
Right.
I mean, everyone is busy, got deadlines to meet. Who has
So-
time for yet another assessment?
Well, that's a fair point, but just imagine for a second.
Yeah.
You pour your heart and soul to a new project. Maybe your career even hinges on it. Everything's going smoothly.
Yeah.
And then bam, fraud hits.
Oh.
Now you're suddenly dealing with financial losses, maybe even legal trouble, and your company's reputation takes a major hit.
Yeah, that's not good.
Not exactly a recipe for success, is it?
Definitely not. And, that's not just some hypothetical scenario either.
Right.
Remember that data breach a few years back at that big tech company?
Oh, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So it turned out they had totally rushed through this new vendor onboarding process
Oh.
and completely skipped a proper IFIA. And the fallout from that was massive.
Yeah.
Not just for the company,
Of course.
but for all the individuals who were involved too.
That's rough.
It's a really stark reminder that understanding IFIAs isn't just about protecting your company, but it's also about protecting yourself.
Absolutely.
Knowing how to spot and then actually mitigate these fraud risks can make you so much more valuable to your team.
For sure.
And it can also help you avoid those career-damaging situations.
Definitely.
So it's like an insurance policy
Yeah.
for your project and maybe even your career.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
I'm starting to see why this is so important.
Good.
But what exactly does an IFIA involve? Is it just like another checklist we got to add to the pile?
Not at all. It's a very systematic process, but it's much more dynamic than just a simple checklist.
Okay.
It's about really identifying vulnerabilities and putting the right controls in place
Got it.
before those vulnerabilities can be exploited.
So it's not just about ticking boxes.
Right.
It's about really understanding the potential risks
Yes.
and then taking action to prevent them.
Absolutely.
And, the source material that we're looking at today actually lays out this really clear step-by-step process.
It does. It's a great framework for our discussion.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's dive into these steps.
Let's do it.
Step 1, according to the source, is to define the scope.
Right.
Seems pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
but is there more to it than meets the eye?
There is, think of it like a detective, outlining a crime scene.
Yeah.
You need to define the boundaries of your investigation.
Right.
What exactly is the project you're assessing?
Yeah.
What are its specific objectives?
Mm-hmm.
What departments or processes will be impacted?
Okay.
Getting crystal clear on all these aspects right from the start is super crucial.
Okay, so no jumping in without knowing exactly what you're looking at.
Right.
Once we've defined the scope, then what's next?
Next comes the brainstorming part,
Oh, fun.
identifying the potential fraud risks.
Okay.
This is where you gather your team and you really dig deep.
Okay.
The source highlights common risks like vendor fraud,
Yeah.
procurement fraud, and even internal collusion.
Yikes.
But it's important to think beyond those as well.
Okay.
What unique risks might your specific industry or project involve?
I can see how that could get pretty complex,
Yeah.
especially for larger projects,
Yeah.
with a lot of moving parts.
Right.
But wouldn't that take forever?
Well,
I mean, how do you even begin to prioritize all those risks?
that's where step 3 comes in, evaluating the impact of each risk.
Okay.
This is where things start to get really interesting.
Interesting in a good way, I hope.
Definitely. Because it's not just about the potential monetary loss, which is what a lot of people focus on.
Okay.
You also need to consider things like operational disruption.
Okay.
How much damage could a fraud incident cause to your day-to-day operations?
Right. And what about the damage to stakeholder trust?
Oh, yeah.
If your customers or investors lose faith in your company, that can be really hard to recover from, right?
Absolutely. And depending on your industry,
Yeah.
you might also have to factor in potential legal or regulatory consequences.
Oh, wow.
So you're essentially asking yourself, how severe would the impact be if this particular fraud actually happened?
So getting a clear picture of the worst case scenario
Yes.
for each risk.
Exactly.
Okay, but wouldn't it be a bit overkill to assume that every single risk is equally likely?
That's why step 4 is so crucial, assessing the likelihood of each risk. You're absolutely right. Not all risks are created equal.
Right.
Some are much more likely to occur than others, and that needs to inform your prioritization.
So how do you actually go about assessing that likelihood?
Right.
Do you just go with your gut feeling, or is there a more like systematic approach?
There are some really helpful tools for this.
Okay.
One common approach is to use a risk matrix.
Okay.
It's a simple but effective way to visualize both the impact and the likelihood of each risk,
Oh, interesting.
which helps you prioritize your mitigation efforts.
A risk matrix. That's interesting. I've never actually used one of those before.
Yeah.
Could you give us a quick rundown of how that works?
Sure. Imagine a grid with likelihood on one axis and impact on the other.
Okay.
You plot each risk on the grid based on your assessment of how likely it is to occur and how severe the impact would be.
Uh-huh.
This gives you a visual representation of your risk landscape, highlighting the areas that require the most attention.
That's a really great way to make it tangible.
Yeah.
And I bet it helps with communication, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone can see the bigger picture and understand why certain risks are being prioritized over others.
Exactly. And that leads us to step 5, which is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
Developing mitigation strategies.
All right.
This is where you take all those identified risks and start designing specific controls and preventative measures to address each one.
So this is where the IFIA gets actionable.
Yes.
We've identified the risks, we assessed their impact and likelihood.
Right.
Now it's time to actually do something about it.
Absolutely.
And I noticed our source mentions some common strategies like stronger vendor vetting processes,
Yeah.
enhancing audit trails to track transactions,
Ah.
and separating duties so no single person has too much control.
Those are all excellent starting points, and they're applicable across a wide range of industries and projects.
Okay.
But it's also important to think about controls that are specific to your particular situation.
So let's say I'm launching a new e-commerce platform.
Okay.
What are some unique risks that I might need to consider?
Well, in that case, you'd need to pay close attention to things like payment security.
Okay.
You'd want to implement robust encryption protocols,
Right.
multi-factor authentication, and maybe even fraud detection software to monitor transactions in real time.
That makes sense. So it's all about layering those controls to create this really strong defense
Exactly.
against potential fraud.
But it's not a one-time effort.
Okay.
That brings us to step 6,
Oh,
monitoring and adjusting.
all right.
Fraudsters are constantly evolving their tactics.
Yeah.
So you need to stay vigilant and adapt your controls over time.
So I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just identify the risks and put some controls in place.
Right.
You have to actively monitor the situation and be prepared to make changes as needed.
You got to think of it like having a security guard who's always on patrol,
Okay.
looking for any suspicious activity and reporting back to you,
Got it.
so you can make adjustments to your security system.
I love that analogy. So we've covered the 6 steps of the IFIA process.
Yes, we have.
And it's clear that it's a lot more than just checking boxes.
So sure.
It's this dynamic, ongoing process
Right.
that requires careful thought and planning.
Yes.
And there are a few more best practices
Yes.
that can really make your IFIA efforts more effective.
Right.
The source mentions the importance of being comprehensive.
Yes.
Don't just skim the surface, really dig deep and explore all potential fraud avenues.
That's key.
So going back to our detective analogy,
Yeah.
we've got to examine every nook and cranny of that crime scene, right?
Absolutely.
No stone unturned.
No stone unturned.
And what about involving the right people?
Yeah,
I imagine that's crucial as well.
It's absolutely essential.
Okay.
You want input from a diverse range of stakeholders, not just the usual suspects.
Right.
Bring in people from finance, IT, legal operations, even customer service.
Wow.
Each department brings a unique perspective to the table, and you want to leverage all that knowledge to get a truly comprehensive view of the risks.
Right, because someone in customer service might have insights into fraud attempts
At the
that
data.
no one else would even think about.
It happens all the time.
It's all about getting that 360-degree view.
Exactly.
And I bet data plays a big role in this as well.
It does.
Right.
Historical information and industry trends can be incredibly valuable.
Okay.
Look at past fraud cases,
Uh-huh.
both within your company and in your industry as a whole, to identify patterns
Okay.
and understand how fraudsters operate.
That's a great point. Learning from others' mistakes
Yeah,
can be a really powerful way to prevent your own.
it is.
It's like having a cheat sheet for fraud prevention.
Exactly.
And speaking of learning from mistakes, I think it's time to move on to our next section,
Okay,
which is all about common pitfalls to avoid.
that's a great idea.
Maybe we can learn from others' missteps.
Exactly.
Let's delve into those after a quick break.
Sounds good. So we spent some time now understanding the steps of an IFIA.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what are some common mistakes that people make when they're trying to conduct these?
Right.
Maybe we can learn from their missteps.
Yeah, for sure.
Even seasoned professionals can fall into certain traps.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And one of the biggest ones is not involving key stakeholders early enough in the process.
You mean like not just bringing in the usual suspects from finance or legal,
Yeah.
but really thinking about who else has a stake in this project and could provide valuable insights.
Exactly. Waiting too long to bring in folks from IT operations or even customer service can create blind spots. They often have such unique perspectives on potential vulnerabilities that others might miss.
Yeah, like if they're the detectives who've already seen the crime scene up close.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
Another common pitfall is being too narrow in scope when identifying potential risks.
So not thinking creatively enough about all the ways that fraud could sneak in.
Precisely. It's so easy to get tunnel vision and focus only on the most obvious risks. But fraudsters are unfortunately quite innovative.
They are.
They're always looking for new angles, new vulnerabilities to exploit.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You need to think broadly and consider all sorts of scenarios,
Okay.
even those that might seem unlikely at first glance.
It's like playing chess with a grandmaster. You gotta anticipate their moves,
Right.
think several steps ahead,
Yes.
and consider all the possible angles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of being caught off guard, I bet failing to monitor things after implementation is another big mistake.
Oh, yeah. Definitely conducting an IFIA is not a one-and-done deal.
Right.
It's just the first step.
It is.
You need to establish ongoing monitoring mechanisms
Yep.
to make sure those controls that you so carefully designed are actually working as intended.
You got it.
It's like setting up a security system, but then never checking the cameras or updating the software.
Right.
You might have the best equipment in the world,
Yeah.
but if you're not actively monitoring it,
Mhm.
it's not going to be very effective.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The fraud landscape is constantly evolving,
It is.
so you need to stay vigilant and adaptable.
Right.
Regularly review your controls, assess their effectiveness, and be prepared to make adjustments as needed.
Makes sense.
It's about creating a dynamic system that can keep pace with the ever-changing threat landscape.
So it's not just about putting out fires.
Right.
It's about preventing them from starting in the first place.
Exactly.
And having a system in place that can adapt to new threats as they emerge.
You got it.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Good.
I'm starting to think about all the projects I've worked on in the past
Yeah.
and wondering if an IFIA could have helped avoid some of the issues we faced.
I think that's a natural reaction. Once you understand the power of IFIAs, you start to see how they could have made a difference in various situations.
Yeah.
But remember, the key takeaway here is that IFIAs are a proactive tool.
Right.
They're about getting ahead of the curve, not just reacting to problems after they've occurred.
And it's not just about protecting the company's bottom line.
Right. It's also about protecting your own career.
Right. Absolutely.
Knowing how to conduct an IFIA and being able to demonstrate that knowledge can make you a much more valuable asset to your team.
It shows that you're thinking strategically,
Right.
that you're not just focused on the task at hand,
Uh-huh.
but also on the bigger picture, on managing risk and ensuring the long-term success of your projects.
We've covered so much ground today,
We have.
from the step-by-step process to best practices,
Yes.
common pitfalls, and even some real-world examples.
Right.
I feel like I've gotten a crash course in fraud prevention.
Good.
But before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that even if you're not directly responsible for conducting IFIAs,
Yeah.
understanding this process and the principles behind it makes you a much more informed and valuable member of your team.
Okay.
You can ask the right questions,
Yeah.
you can spot potential red flags,
Uh-huh.
and contribute to a culture of proactive risk management within your organization. It's like having a neighborhood watch for your company.
Yes.
Everyone's looking out for each other and working together to keep things safe.
That's a great way to put it. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into initial fraud impact assessments.
It's been a pleasure exploring this crucial topic with you.
We hope this deep dive has equipped you with the knowledge and insights you need to approach fraud prevention proactively and strategically.
And remember, even if you're not directly responsible for conducting IFIAs, understanding this process makes you a more informed and valuable member of your team.
Absolutely. The more we all understand about fraud risks and mitigation strategies, the better we can protect our organizations and ourselves.
So as you embark on new projects or implement changes within your organization, keep IFIAs top of mind.
They're not just a compliance exercise. They're an investment in your organization's long-term success and stability.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
We encourage you to continue exploring this topic and reach out if you have any questions or specific scenarios you'd like to discuss.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant. It's interesting, we often hear about fraud after it's happened, like a cautionary tale.
Right.
But thinking about it this way with IFIAs,
Yeah.
it's almost like we're flipping the script.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about shifting from that reactive mindset
Yeah,
to a proactive one.
right.
Instead of, cleaning up the mess after the fact, we're taking steps to prevent the mess from happening in the first place.
I think that's what makes this so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just about catching the bad guys.
Right.
It's about building a culture where fraud doesn't even have a chance to take root.
Exactly. When you integrate those IFIAs into your project planning process, you're essentially building a fortress around your initiative.
Yeah.
You're identifying those weak points. You're reinforcing the walls and setting up a surveillance system to keep a watchful eye on things.
So instead of being paranoid about fraud lurking around every corner,
Right.
we can be confident knowing we've taken the necessary steps to protect ourselves.
That's the idea. And that confidence can translate into better decision-making,
Okay.
more efficient processes, and ultimately a more successful and sustainable organization.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gained this whole new perspective on fraud prevention.
Okay.
It's not just about compliance or
Right.
ticking boxes. It's
Yeah.
about being smart, being strategic,
Absolutely.
and being proactive.
It is, and it's about empowering yourself.
Yeah.
The more you understand about IFIAs and the principles behind them, the more you can contribute to a culture of security and resilience within your own team and organization.
So to wrap things up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I would say this: IFIAs are not just for risk management professionals or security experts. They're for everyone.
Everyone.
Whether you're leading a project, developing a new product, or simply working within a team, understanding IFIAs can make you a more valuable and insightful contributor.
That makes sense.
It's about being aware of the risks, asking the right questions, and advocating for that proactive approach to fraud prevention.
It's about taking ownership, being empowered, and playing an active role in protecting your organization
Yes,
and your own career.
for sure.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into initial fraud impact assessments.
It's been a pleasure sharing this knowledge with you.
We hope you found it informative and insightful.
And we encourage you to keep exploring this topic and apply these principles to your own work.
Absolutely, knowledge is power, and when it comes to fraud prevention, the more you know, the better equipped you are to stay ahead of the game.
Well said.
So until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and keep those IFIAs top of mind.
Thanks for listening, everyone.